This week, Assumptions is brought to you by ATB. If you're an artist, you know that banking can be difficult because your income isn't exactly traditional. ATB's new arts and culture branch was built for you. You can finally get your banking done in a way that works for you and the industry you work in. For more information, go to atb.com/thebranch. Thanks, ATB. And now, onto the show. Why is your life interesting, Daniel?
Is my life interesting? I mean, I want to pretend that it is, so I post Instagram photos. But if interesting means being surrounded by books, then yeah, my life's interesting.
I'm already bored.
I fall down to my knees. Eyes are raised to the sky.
Welcome to Assumptions. This is the podcast where two friends, a Christian and an atheist, try to understand the other's worldview.
That's
My name
right.
is Kyle.
And my name's Daniel. And we've been talking a lot about certain topics, like worldview and storytelling, and soon we'll be having an episode all about sex and relationships and those kind of ethics. But, really a lot of worldview comes down to individual lives. And a big part of, I heard a quote from one of my favorite thinkers, Mike Cosper, who said that 80% of theology, so your belief about God, is biography, the details of your life. And we actually have an idea, we'll see if this happens, of a future season of actually doing a more biographical look at how our views have changed over the years, which is great because we're so young. So much to talk about. But because it's been a while since we've put out a season, and it's been a few months longer than we had anticipated until the next season comes out, we wanted to kind of update ourselves and the world on what has changed in our lives and why it's been a while, and just filter that through the lens of worldview.
Absolutely. And the first week we're going to do this is about you, Daniel.
Yay.
And since we finished season one, let's jump into it. What was your summer like?
Oh, well, I had great plans for my summer. I had it was a tumultuous summer in many reasons. I left the company that I'd worked for 5 years.
You can probably say what the company is at this point. Yeah.
Do you still work there, though?
I don't know. Do I?
Do you? Yeah, so I had worked for Apple for 5 years. And it is interesting because Apple, I was homeschooled and was very much in a sheltered, my social life was the church.
By the way, could tell the very first time I met you.
Yeah, I was homeschooled.
You had the look.
I had the look. Well, define that look.
Basically grizzled and just mouth agape at buildings that are taller than 2 stories.
Yeah, because I was homeschooled in the country.
That's right.
But if you think about it, so I was homeschooled, didn't leave home for most of the day, in the country, without internet access, and my church was in the country.
Right.
And so it was not that was a bad thing necessarily. I learned a lot through it. But arriving then at Apple, which was a more liberal, very, very contemporary company, and having friends who were bisexual and gay and atheists and getting along with them, it was quite the learning process.
Did you or your family worry about that specifically?
Oh, there were definitely times where I don't think it was ever brought up. Oh my gosh, he's going off to this new environment. But I remember like having friends who were living in a relationship together that weren't married or encountering people like you that had sexual identities that were different. I had to work through that, and we'll talk about that I think on our next season. But my point is, I had gone from Apple had been kind of I grew up there,
Right,
and I really became of age in that environment, and so then to leave it again was definitely a transition.
Right. So then you said this was a tumultuous summer. You left Apple. What else was going on?
So my plan was to do some kind of reorganize my room and get ready for school. So my plan was to go to school in September, kind of early August, had some courses. And then I was going to go down to Vancouver to attend a 1-week course, graduate level course on poetry with one of my favorite authors. And then I was going to go down to Portland, my favorite city, and take a course down there as well. And the Vancouver part went great, but I actually didn't make it down to Portland. I got sick and had to cancel that portion of the trip.
Oh, man. So before we get into the sickness, like, who is this poet that you like?
Yes, so Malcolm Guite has been one of my favorite figures for several years now. He is a poet, priest, and academic from Cambridge, England. And he looks kind of like a hobbit meets a dwarf. He's he's got long hair, long beard, smokes a pipe, and lectures on poetry and faith and these kind of things.
I remember you sending me, it was probably like an Instagram post or something like that. And I was like, oh, this is a Tolkien creation.
That's right.
That you just sent to me.
Yeah. But he's been someone who, Cambridge is where my dad's side of the family's from, and he actually worked at the church my grandparents were married in. So there are these kind of cultural ties there. But just his work on how Christians should be imaginative and how to read poetry and how to appreciate poetry have shaped me a lot over the years. So to actually spend a week with him, and I was able to interview him and smoke a pipe with him and have a weekend where we were able to interact quite a bit. Yeah. That was a real treat. It was
what
a real
poetry
treat
were you reading?
Oh, it was the English poetic tradition. So we went through
like
sonnets.
Browning and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, we went through sonnets. We went through all the way up to more contemporary poetry. It was pretty diverse, but the English poetic tradition.
Right.
Yeah.
And then when did you start to get sick?
Well, out in Vancouver, I had this excellent time with him, and that was great. And then I ended up flipping my bike. I was cycling to meet my cousin Benjamin, and flipped my bike and ended up having a dislocated finger, and that kind of wore me out quite a bit. And then when I went down to Victoria to spend a week relaxing, I guess I got some version of strep throat. And I've been fighting sickness. I took 3 months away from work earlier in the year, and so it was tumultuous throughout, just to have this kind of threat of sickness hanging over, and having to cancel portions of my life because of that. And for a while there, I wasn't even sure if I would be able to make it into school in September if this is the same thing that I've been fighting all year.
Yeah, I don't want to, out you or anything like that, but you've been really, battling sickness over like the last couple of years.
That's right. Yeah.
How has that affected your, not personality is the wrong word, but how has that affected you as a person, just being sick seemingly constantly?
Yeah. It's interesting. My dad is chronically ill. He has colitis.
Right.
So I don't have that. But there's a lot of sickness in our family in that sense. And what you see is potential for what you could be doing professionally or creatively or academically is severely halted by that. And for me, it wasn't that bad. But I'm surrounded by that kind of reminder of what you want to achieve as a person is severely limited. And I think as a Christian, that is a good thing, because it reminds you that your achievements and your potential of what you can do. Because when you're sick, you don't have the energy to live every moment. You can't do the projects you want to do. You have to put time aside just to rest. And so it's this constant reminder that what I do with my work isn't the sum of who I am.
Right.
And I see it with my dad because he's someone that hasn't done academically what his dad or his grandfather have been able to do. But what he has done is been able to, when I've got sick or both of my sisters have had severe bouts of sickness, he's really been someone who can remind us of who we are despite that, because he's been through it, and you can trust him so much more because he's lived it. It becomes not just a faith that you talk about, but that you have to actually experience because you go through those things.
What have you, because you were down and out for a little bit, what did you work on? What did you do?
Well, one of the things that was great about this last year, so this isn't just the summer, and during the summer, it ended up just being a couple weeks that I was down for, and I listened to Bruce Springsteen's autobiography on audiobook.
Pause for a second.
Okay.
You read the Bruce Springsteen biography.
Yeah.
How many albums of Bruce Springsteen had you listened to before you started that?
One or two, and not very thoroughly. I think I listened to Nebraska a couple times.
Uh-huh.
But I've been going through, personally, I put this challenge up I realized that I listen to music kind of sporadically, and I figured, well, I like to read the classic books, I like to watch the classic movies. I should listen to the classic music. So I pulled up Rolling Stone magazine's 2012 list of the top 500 albums of all time, and there's a lot of Bruce Springsteen on there. So I kind of knew that I had to tackle him at some point.
Right.
And when the reviews for his book came out, and especially the reviews for his audiobook, which he narrates, I thought, well, this is a good excuse to dive into his life and listen to this music.
So what did you learn from the boss?
The boss, he's someone that is, it's an 18-hour audiobook, and you're listening to him narrate his life. And I listened to it all summer, and I missed having his voice in my ear. It was sad to see it go after that. I hadn't listened to him before musically, but I have so much respect for him now because he's someone who, he's someone who's striving against the machinery of the American system, and he's had a very he creates music for the downtrodden, the people that are forgotten.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about Bruce Springsteen, is that like one of his most famous songs, right? Like Born in the USA. This is like this huge like song. There's like this patriotic song. There's like rah rah rah. But if you listen to the lyrics of that, this is not about like the politicians or the upper class. This is about the working class of America that we're talking about.
He's doing a show on Broadway right now.
Yeah,
which is him and a guitar and lighting, and he sings that song without any of the anthemness. And you realize what it's really about.
Well, that seems pretentious, doesn't it?
I know, a little bit. But it was interesting because being sick for 3 months in the spring, what it did force me to realize was it allowed me to work on projects outside of work. So I was able to do some creative projects. I like this podcast, like some writing about film, some interviews, and get validation. And it really encouraged me to make that next step, which I've been planning and talking about for the last 5 years and beyond, which is to attend university. And so being outside of the working context of Apple kind of made me realize it just took the pressure off, because when you're in a working context like that and every day you're reminded of what you want to do and the potential that's there, it's hard to take a step back from that. And being forced to be sick and work in a different context creatively was I realized kind of how unhappy I was in that environment, and that there were other options.
What was the potential that you thought you were losing out on?
I wanted to do full-time training at Apple. And I saw a lot of opportunity for that, and through sometimes my own errors and just the politics of the company and how they were opening positions, it just wasn't happening.
Right.
Yeah.
So you eventually now go to university.
That's right.
Why is university important to you?
A good friend of mine, who is himself an academic, he graduated from his PhD from Cambridge. He says that what you study isn't necessarily about what you want to do, it's about who you want to be. And working for 5 years right out of high school and being able to be somewhat successful at that, I think it then forced me to really ask myself, well, why do I want to go back to do school? It's because I want a better job? Not necessarily, but it's because of who I want to be. And I think that being immersed in the liberal arts and being immersed in the disciplines, the discourses that humans have done for thousands of years, it's a training. It's a training in how to be human, and I wanted that.
This week, Assumptions is also brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. Both Daniel and I are so happy to be part of the network. I suggest checking out other podcasts on the network, something like the Expats podcast. Host Adam Rosenhart describes the show like this: Canada exports a lot of worthy things: universal human rights, the idea of a UN peacekeeping force, poutine, but one of the country's greatest exports, at least in my opinion, is its people. I agree. Check out the Expats podcast and all the other shows by visiting albertapodcastnetwork.com. And now back to the show. I guess where I come down on this, because I definitely went to university. Yeah. I value very much my university experience.
And you did English. You did a more
I did an English degree,
type.
Which I believe is what you are going through as well.
Yeah.
I would have warned you against it. No, I'm joking. I guess.
Do we need to talk?
This is mainly because of the conversation I have with my dad a lot of the times, which is, do people need to go to university? Sure. And I don't think that everyone does. No. I don't think that it's the right fit for every single person either. But I guess what is it about your personality, or what is it about your worldview that values the knowledge or the reading list that you're going to have inside of university versus what you could just do by yourself?
Yeah, I think part of it is a humility. You could do it by yourself, and I think both of us are friends because we like that. We like top 500 album lists and working your way through it. Whether that's Jaws rather that's Saw, or whether that's other films.
I only watch the greats, man.
That's right. But the self-learning we're good at. But self-learning versus sitting under someone who is sitting underneath the tradition. He just says that there's not everything can be achieved by your own knocking on doors. Mm-hmm. That was homeschooled, so a lot of that was knocking on doors by myself. But there's something about being immersed in something that's greater than you, and one of the things I'm learning about university, when you get the grades you don't necessarily anticipate, is going, oh, well, I am here to learn. I am here to get better and to realize where those gaps in my thinking are.
Do you still value your homeschooling?
Oh, yes, definitely.
And why specifically?
It's a good question. It's something that I think about a lot, and I don't know how much of it I necessarily value. Whereas when I came out of it, I thought it's the only way to educate.
Right.
But what I valued about it was being. There's a couple ways I can answer this. One way is just the academic route, which is that I was able to focus on what I could do well instead of having to learn. Instead of being a cookie cutter and having the exact same curriculum for every student, I was able to customize that and think outside the box and do stuff that most people couldn't. So there's just that. And as someone who has learning disabilities and ADHD, I think I survived without medication because of that kind of context. The other aspect of it was just the character forming. And this is something that I would probably challenge more now, because I think the isolation in our age can be a good thing because it forces you to develop those deep roots. But it can be a bad thing too, because you're just stuck in your own world the whole time. That's why I think I needed that time at Apple before I went to university. But there was something to be said about, especially growing up in those tumultuous periods of life, where just having someone you can't hide anything. You can't hide what you're wearing or how you're behaving. The formation that comes from parents is there all the time.
Yeah, I think that's, I guess, what I'm driving at, because I'm coming at homeschooling from a very different place, because I went to public school for all 12 years of my education.
Like?
And I guess I can see pros and cons in going back and forth of being homeschooled versus going through the traditional way. And you said that you kind of came of age when you started to work at Apple.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that specifically?
I think I describe it kind of like a monastery in a sense. Because I remember in high
we all
school,
wear the same thing.
Yeah,
So yes.
But in high school, doing research on the monastic tradition, and I'm fascinated by it because of this community that's formed by it. But this idea that you're immersed in something for a long time. I don't think Christians are called to be just immersed in an isolated environment the whole time, but it's a good way to get trained. And so what burst that bubble was then having this training in what it is to be Christian and what it is to think Christian, and be surrounded by Christians, and then being thrust into an environment where you're actually now the minority, and an isolated minority at that, and just learning to be friends with people like you, and learning that there's value, that God's goodness doesn't just come from the faith, that there's common grace, there is goodness in every person, and just learning that it's not necessarily about telling the gospel to you, telling you about Christ, and then having that taken care of. That it's a much longer process, and that it comes down to relationships, and that you're really playing a small part in it. Yeah, you're
not there to sway everyone's opinion all at the same time.
Yeah, you're there to be a light and to have these conversations when they come up naturally.
If you could change water into wine, though, right now, I would convert right this second.
Okay, let's do it.
That was wine already. So now that you're at university, what did you discover first day? Like your first day of university, can you explain to me what that experience was like?
It was different because I took a 2-week course before the semester actually started.
Okay.
So it was a little
like no one was there
scattered.
but you and like 5 other people.
Yeah, it was like 20, and it was a further learning course. So it was designed for people that need more help, and I just wanted to take it. It was on academic writing. I just thought, well, here's a good chance to get to know the university. And
was this at the same university
yes,
that you?
Totally.
So can you explain what university you're going to?
Yeah, so I'm going to a school called St. Mary's University in Calgary. It's Catholic.
You're filled with guilt every day.
That's right. No, but it's interesting. So they're a unique school because, for a couple reasons, they are founded on the liberal arts tradition. So they were started. Their English and history departments are the oldest in the school.
Okay.
And so that's just nice to have that as a focus. But they have a connection to the Catholic diocese and to that system. They do a lot of training for the Catholic schools for education, but their vision is not to be a Catholic university per se, but rather a university that has Catholic values that is open to every worldview. And one of their visions is that in our age, which is a pluralistic age, we have to have dialogue on these kind of things. We have to know our roots, and we have to have a space where we can talk about that. And so that's what they try to create.
It's like they took our podcast and made a school out of it.
They should sponsor us.
That's right. Yeah, so sorry, tell me about this first day then of actual people being in. You took this little course for the first 2 weeks, but now more people are there.
Sure.
What is it like being a student?
I love it. I really love it. I think one of the things that strikes me as interesting is because I've been in one environment for so long where I'm surrounded by people that know me and that are friends with me at Apple, and you walk in and you know everybody and you say hello and ask how everybody's doing as you walk through the store. To then be in an environment where you're brand new. And at Apple, everyone knew I was a Christian. And at St. Mary's, they don't. And so it was an interesting new environment that way. At Apple, when I was hanging out socially with friends and I would drop a swear word, it was an amazing reaction. I loved it. And now you do it at St. Mary's and there's no reaction because nobody knows that
That's
it's special.
Right. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. But having so that's been the thing that's been different is you're immersed in this new environment as someone who has, in a sense, a new slate, a fresh slate, and how are you known in that environment?
What classes are you taking?
Well, I'm taking 3.5 right now. History of Ideas.
What's the half?
It's choir, so it's a half credit.
Okay.
You get 1 credit
For every note that you hit.
That's right. So there's choir but the History of Ideas is taught by this character. His name is Howard Hopkins, Professor Howard Hopkins, and he's a hoot.
A hoot and a half.
He's great. He's someone he's a philosopher, and he has this shock of white hair, big white beard.
I'd assume.
Yeah, and then wears loud ties and and big work boots and belt buckles. He's from Cape Breton.
Oh wow!
But he's someone who's he was telling a story about a friend of his who is Catholic and is a philosopher as well, and just brilliant guy that can walk circles around you in his argumentation. And he was being so this friend of his was being asked by someone who's very materialistic, very, if I can't see and touch it, it doesn't exist. And he said, Hugo, why are you a Christian? Because this philosopher was a committed Roman Catholic. And Hugo, Howard Hopkins' friend, said, well, it's all about that chap. Meaning Jesus. It's all about that chap. And I love that story.
That's good. Okay, so you're doing history of
History of
thought.
Ideas, yeah.
History of Ideas. What else?
Yeah, and then English.
English.
And then drama.
Oh, and drama.
Yeah.
Like actually performing with drama or just reading plays?
Performing, acting.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff are you acting?
We're doing a Clifford Oates play right now, which was a 1940s writer. So those kind of like classic Miller, is that the Arthur Miller.
Arthur Miller.
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
that kind of genre is what we tend to use as our scripts.
Right. And what have you read in your English class so far?
Well, the prof in the English class is a expert on medieval literature.
Oh, nice.
Which
Okay.
is a lot of fun, and she just loves.
So like
the
Arthurian myths
Chaucer,
and stuff like that, and Chaucer.
Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
Yeah.
But so that's a lot of fun. But she's someone who she loves it because of just how crude it gets. So she's like, I want to burst your idea of this prudish society. So she has us read the worst of the Miller's Tale and the Canterbury Tales.
It's not pretty.
No, it's not. So it's been fun.
All right.
Yeah.
I want to tie together what you kind of said at the beginning to right now. You mentioned how when you started at Apple, like you had one goal eventually. Like, I'm going to be going to school soon. Like this is just like a temporary thing. And then we fast forward 5.5 years and now we're in this different position.
Yeah.
So what do you think would have shocked yourself 5 years ago that you would be able to tell yourself now?
About myself.
Yeah. If you went back 5 years in a little time machine and you could tell that guy who was starting out at Apple, what would you say? It's like, this is going to blow your mind.
It's going to shatter a lot of
First off,
presuppositions.
the iPhone 8. It is remarkable.
I think my attitude going into Apple was, like you said, this is a gig. I'll make money. And I can go to school in a year or two. Mm-hmm. And what I learned was that I learned personally so much from that experience. And that what I took away, it was a bank account full of savings, but that wasn't the primary thing. It was community. It was how I was shaping people and being involved in people's lives. it was the value of work and how just working day in and day out and learning the importance of that in the Christian view of the world. And the growth myself. I was humbled a lot at Apple. There's a lot of stuff I did really well, and that a lot of honors I took with me. But there's a lot of times where I was humbled and had to learn what it was just to have my identity shattered in many ways. And so I guess that's the attitude that I would say to myself, is that sit down, be humble. Like, in the sense that you're not just here for almost this consumerist end of making money, get in and get out, but you're here to shape people, and you're here to be shaped yourself by people.
It's like we could bring back that conversation we had last episode about Arcade Fire, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
it's
Totally.
not just about the consumerism part of this.
Yeah,
There's
which
something more.
Which is weird thinking from Apple, because I think when
exactly.
you don't work there anymore, you can take a step back and be like, okay, yeah, they do some pretty incredible things, and they're a remarkable company in how much they value people. But at the same time, every year
They're selling
it's like,
stuff,
yeah, and it's like the second coming of Christ is this new iPhone, and when you're caught up in it, you're like, oh yeah, this is amazing.
I've seen like Christ 18 times now. Kind of reversed on that. Because I'm so fascinated by time.
Yeah.
What do you think the next 5 years is going to be?
Yeah.
Like in 5 years, what do you think you're going to be doing?
At Apple, what I learned that is not to get caught up on a specific identity in terms of wanting a specific position. So it's easy to go, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a prof, or whatever that is. And what I realized when I thought about it, when I looked at both our creative projects that we've done together and I've done by myself and what I've done at Apple, is the things that give me the most satisfaction are creating, collaborating, and communicating. Kind of what we're doing right now. But those three things. And so if I can be doing a combination of those things in whatever context, pursuing that rather than pursuing a specific role. So what'll I be like in 5? I don't know. I hope that I'll be more balanced, that I'll be closer to Christ, that I'll be, and I hope, like I mentioned in the last podcast, I think that it's exciting to be in this shifting cultural landscape where transcendence is longed for, and yet the cultural norms of Christianity that have in some sense corrupted it, in some sense shaped it over the last 100, 200 years are starting to fall away. They're starting to be revealed as facades if you look at evangelicalism in America and Canada right now. So I'm excited about that. And it was funny because I remember we're going to be talking about sexuality on our next podcast, and I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Well, there's going to be an interview with me.
Right. I mean, our next season. Sexuality. And at one point I was hanging out with some friends at school, and they were talking about the gay pride parade, and I didn't say anything about it. And I kind of thought, that's weird. Like, should I say something about this? Like, I'm just kind of shutting up about it.
Yeah.
And then the next day, I was teaching a learning seminar that they had asked me to teach at the school, and my prof for the summer course came to attend it. And he stuck around after, and we talked for about half an hour. And at one point in the conversation, he says, well, what's your view as a Christian on homosexuality? And it wasn't terrifying to answer that. It felt very natural, and we had an excellent conversation about it. And it felt like that was the right context to it. What I'm trying to say is that I think what I'm learning is that it's not about coming out with a T-shirt with my beliefs and walking around portraying that, but rather it comes out of community, and it comes out of living with people and being curious about people. And I think that's what our podcast is all about. So I hope that those next 5 years are a way for me to be faithful to my God and to Christ, but in a way that is rooted in the community of others.
Yeah, I look forward to the conversations we're going to continue to have over this next season. As I get older, really want to make sure that I'm not the silent person in the conversation, that if I do see something that's wrong or something that I disagree with, I do want to actually speak up. Yeah. Of course, there are times you have to pick your spots. I totally understand. I'm not going to like jump up when someone else is giving a conversation I'm not a part of, for instance. But I think if I'm having a conversation with somebody else and they do say something that's derogatory, not something that I agree with, I need to make sure I'm saying that. So we'll continue this conversation as we go forward. This has been Assumptions, a podcast, like I said, where two guys try and discover each other's worldviews and understand them a little bit more. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send stuff you like, stuff you have questions about, stuff you want to battle us over, by sending an email to assumptionspod@gmail.com. You can go and see us over on our Facebook community, facebook.com/assumptionspod. You can also find us on Twitter, just @assumptionspod. Look at all those things that are the exact same word.
It's easy.
That's right. If you want to get in contact with me, I am @the_Kyle_Marshall on Twitter. That's Marshall with 2 L's. And then, once again, Daniel, what is the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Just Google my name.
That's right.
But if you do that, you'd find my website, danielmelvillejones.com. Yeah.
Perfect.
Cool.
We'll
Well, thanks for
continue.
listening to this conversation. I hope it's helped kind of walk through what it is to have a life and have a belief. And I'm looking forward to talking about your life and how it's changed for you on our next episode.
Find out how I battled the shark.
Really?
No,
Can't
not
wait.
at all.
Okay.
Not at all. This has been Assumptions. Thank you so much for listening. Assumptions is written and produced by Daniel Melville Jones and Kyle Marshall. This episode was edited by Kyle Marshall. The music that you heard in this week's episode was brought to you by the Parson Redheads, whose latest album, Blurred Harmony, is available on every streaming service. Podcast artwork was designed by Chris Taniguchi, photography from the great Jen Hall. One last thing that you can do for Daniel and myself is to rate and review us on iTunes. This allows us to draw a bigger audience. Feedback and comments is also appreciated. You can do that by sending an email to assumptionspod@gmail.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks.